Hello and a very warm welcome. My name is Chris and this is my YouTube tribute to Wing Commander Ken Wallis.
Louis Breget of France hinged the rotor blades of his gyroplane using universal joints. It was far more controllable than previous helicopters, but the rotors still turned in opposite directions, and in 1935 this arrangement brought disaster. The idea of hinging the rotor blades originated with Juan de la Cierva, the Spanish pioneer. He invented another type of aircraft with a rotary wing, the autogyro. As well as a propeller, it had a rotor overhead which turned freely due to the forward motion of the aircraft. Its takeoff and landing run were very short, but it could not hover over a fixed point.
Don't they look funny all flying together up there? Yes, they look like bloody long legs.
The future of the autogyro looked promising. It seemed to be the ideal popular aircraft.
Senor Juan de la Cierva was a Spaniard who wanted to build an aeroplane that wouldn't stall. That was his original thought, I think. And he realized that if the wings could be made to go round and round, that they would maintain speed, and if they glided around in the same way that the sycamore seed does, that they wouldn't stop, even though the airplane was stationary. He made a number of experiments, but he quickly realized one thing was that the blade that is going forward through the air on this aeroplane with a rotary wing would have to be allowed to climb or to somehow compensate for the fact that it was giving more lift than the blade that was going backwards through the air. And he eventually developed what we now call the articulated rotor head, which is the key to success of the helicopter. He really solved most of the problems that would otherwise have beset the helicopter.
Once the riddle of the helicopter had been solved, interest in the autogyro declined. But today, Ken Wallis has taken up Cierva's dream.
I see the autogyro as the smallest practical working aircraft. The small scale appeals to me. The fact that in minutes it can be on a trailer behind the car, taken to a site where one needs to operate, but it can lift 3 times its own weight, which is a tremendous weight ratio, and this little machine could fly for 11 hours non-stop if one were prepared to put up with the noise and discomfort. Naturally stable, and it's possible to fly the autogyro in such a relaxed manner that you can attend to another task, which is the primary task of the mission. The other quite important thing is that if the engine should stop, then the rotors still keep turning. It doesn't mean that it stays up, because you've got to look for somewhere to land it, but at least the rotors still keep turning. I think the autogyro hasn't had the success of the helicopter in the post-30s, because the helicopter could do so many tricks that the autogyro couldn't do. It can actually take off vertically, and it can land vertically, and obviously it can hover, go sideways and backwards and so forth. But you do pay a very big price for that. I believe that the autogyro is a member of a family of aircraft. It doesn't have to compete with the helicopter. It fits in as part of the family.
First, man had to prove that a machine with rotors could actually fly. One curious machine in 1925 did just that. It was called an autogyro. And its legacy lives on in the heart of the Norfolk countryside.
In 61 years of flying, I've flown all sorts of aeroplanes, from Gypsy Moths right up to the great B36 10-engine bomber. And as far as I'm concerned, for the sheer pleasure of flying, the autogyro beats the whole lot. There's a wonderful feeling of flight. It's almost being like a bird.
At the ripe age of 82, Wing Commander Ken Wallis still flies the autogyro. He's been dedicated to them since he left the Air Force in the 60s.
Well, this is a bit like an aerial motorbike. It's so stable that you can take your feet off the rudder pedals and ride it side saddle. It flies itself.
The autogyro is simply steered by stick and rudder. But what makes it unique is that, unlike a helicopter, its rotors are not driven by an engine. They're driven solely by the wind. The small engine at the back is to drive the propeller. This gives forward motion. The first one was designed by Spaniard Juan de la Cierva in 1925. It looked rather like a flying windmill. Although only experimental, it was the first aircraft with rotors able to fly, and Cierva was asked to demonstrate it in front of US Congress.
Until then, helicopters were just not practical. There were various hops into the air and crashes and so on. But many of the problems that the helicopter was facing were solved by the autogyro.
Convinced they'd still be practical, Ken started to design autogyros in 1961.
In here I've got all my autogyros, all 19 of them. I keep them together.
Built almost 40 years later than Cierva's, Ken's are a little more advanced. He's designed and built so many as they've been used for everything from aerial photography to search and rescue.
You only live twice. A lot of people say it must have been fun making the film. The answer was it was really hard work. I did all the flying, 85 flights, 46 hours in the air, over the volcanoes in Japan, and we were 6,000 feet up. But of course, Sean Connery has been seen to sit in the seat wearing an open-neck sleeveless shirt outside his trousers. So although it was 6,000 feet, 6 o'clock in the morning, I was still having to fly in an open-neck sleeveless shirt. So it was quite cold. I'd rather fly one of these than any of the other aircraft that I've flown. And I've flown all sorts of jets, a lot, up to 10 engines, but I'd rather be in one of these in bad weather. And in very high winds, it's absolutely a wonderful aircraft. I've flown many times when the military helicopters and so on have been grounded because there's too much wind in displays. It works. The rotor blades are just like two sycamore seeds joined together at the seed. They windmill around, but by being set at an angle and pushed along, the air still keeps flying up from underneath them, and it still keeps turning, but it stays up. I was interested in small aircraft, and very portable, but also in World War II, another aircraft was made called the Hafner Rotor Chute. And this was a twin-bladed autogyro, and the idea was that a man could be towed behind a Whitley bomber or something, sitting in this little thing, and he could release when he wanted, and he could glide down and land where he desired to. Whereas, of course, in those days, when you jumped out with a parachute, you went exactly where the wind decided to take you. So that was the inspiration really for a very small practical aircraft. And so I sat down with a clean sheet of paper in 1960 and I designed this machine, which turned out actually to be far, far better than I would have dared to hope. Having made the first successful prototype, that had a very noisy engine in it and not totally reliable. I went to different aircraft for different jobs. All variations on this basic design, the vital parts of the rotor head and rotor blades are the same. But one of the greatest assets of the Autogyro is the vibration level is very low, much less than the average helicopter. It is naturally stable, and that means that the pilot can fly the aircraft, but he can attend to other tasks while he's flying it. When I was in Saudi Arabia with this aircraft, I reloaded very complicated cameras about 6 times in a single flight. The other thing is, of course, that the rotors still keep turning, even if the engine stops. That doesn't mean that you can keep flying, but it doesn't fall out of the sky if the engine stops. Whereas with a helicopter, the pilot has to take a very quick action to become an autogyro. And so there are certain conditions of flight with a helicopter. If engine failure occurs or gearbox failure occurs, then you have a problem. I made this one, completed it in 1967, just after I'd been flying for the James Bond film. And this one has had silencers on. It's been about the quietest aircraft in Europe, I think. It could not be detected at 3,000 feet above the Norfolk ambient noise level. It's a camera platform. It carries cameras in various modes, up to a pack of 4 cameras using special filters so that it can bring out color differences that are too small to see normally. Or it can carry infrared equipment which detects heat. It can detect leaks in pipelines by the temperature change, detection of animals or missing cars, transmitting to the ground while the flying's going on, so a man can watch the picture and say, go over that bit again. It's been used for police work, and it was in 1970, because it was so silent, it was used on the Loch Ness investigation looking for the monster. Of course, it makes no downdraft, so it doesn't disturb the ground at all. It doesn't frighten animals. That's another interesting thing. I've flown in Brazil in a storm that they say no aircraft can possibly survive. There were big pieces of palm tree passing me that had been blown off the mountains. And I just went out over the coast because I hoped the wind would be a little bit less violent up and down over the coast. And in no time at all, it had clouded over, got absolutely black. The sunlight had gone, and a black thing came down from the sky and joined something coming up out of the water, and a water spout took place right beside the aircraft. And then gradually it eased away and again the sun came out. A lot of people say, oh, it must take a lot of flying and you must be very busy flying the thing. This aircraft knows how to fly without me on board. It's completely naturally stable and it will ride out bumps. The only thing is that you trim it for a given speed and so on. If you open the throttle, it will roll a little bit one way due to the torque reaction from the propeller. But you can trim it for any condition. And I would rather fly it in rough weather than any other aircraft. I could make one probably in about 5 or 6 months. They don't all take the same time. In fact, when I came back from making the James Bond film, I made the one there with the 100 horsepower Rolls-Royce engine in. I started on it in January of 1967 and I finished it in May 1967. This pair of rotor blades I literally made in 10 days in the old Link trainer room at Fighter Command headquarters. I was the weapons officer at Fighter Command at the time, and I had access to a nice room in which to make the rotor blades. I made them in 10 days leave. They're very easy to fly, in the same way that a motorcycle is quite easy to ride if you've ridden a bicycle. It's also a temptation to show off and do silly things, because you can do such silly things and get away with it, but there is a limit. Come on, show some interest, guys. Kick back. It was one day I swung it very quickly, and the magneto fired at full advance. It backfired. Caught my hand. All right.
It's really a bit extra difficult today.
Can I help at all or not?
No, I could do it.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed that short film that I've put together, and I dedicate it to the life and work of Wing Commander Ken Wallis, a truly extraordinary person who achieved so much in his long life. He was flying, well, really right up until his 96th year, which is just absolutely incredible, and I'm just absolutely in awe of everything that he achieved in such a very humble, quiet, very, very gentlemanly way. He was a true gentleman, well, a true officer and a gentleman. Thank you, Ken Wallis.
Can I ask you, what's it like being a part of this exhibition and having Little Nellie?
Well, it's amazing really, after all these years, to the long-term effects of being James Bond. I hadn't even seen a James Bond film before I took part in that one. I knew of them, but I haven't actually seen one.
And was it quite hard filming in Japan?
Oh yes. Anyway, a lot of people say it must have been fun making the film. I can tell you it wasn't. It was 84 flights and about 44 hours in the air in Japan and Spain to make that film. And the takeoff and landing sites were the hairy bits, cliff edges literally. And you'd have to climb to about 6,000 or 8,000 feet over the volcano crater, do the shot with the other aircraft, come back, slither to a stop on a cliff edge, think, thank God I've still got the aircraft. About half an hour later, number 4 camera had a hair in the gate, got to do it again. Just the same as on the ground, cut, do it again. So it was not fun, it was serious.
Did you have much problems with the turbulence within the volcanoes?
No, my aircraft was fine, but a number of the other aircraft did have some trouble, and they were constantly saying, could I slow down a bit? They couldn't keep up with me with the villain's helicopter.
And the other thing that I have heard about the filming was that they had a problem with the aerial cameraman, Johnny Jordan. Can you tell us a bit about
Yeah, well, actually, John Jordan is a wonderful chap, and whereas the rest of us in the evening, when there wasn't any filming, we'd go out and enjoy ourselves in the Japanese city of Kagoshima. He'd stay behind in his room in the hotel and think up tomorrow's shot. And he's the chap who thought up the fact that 007 sees the shadow of his aircraft flying around a volcano crater, and then he sees the shadows of the others chasing him. That was a shot that John thought up, totally devoted to the job. But there was an unfortunate accident between one of the other helicopters and the camera helicopter. John was filming with his feet on the skid of the camera helicopter, shooting out to the side, and the other helicopter was supposed to be doing a fast pass towards him and just missed. But the helicopter pilot hadn't allowed for the altitude, and you need a bit more space to turn sharply at altitude, and his rotor blade sliced through the skid of the camera helicopter and through John Jordan's leg. The camera helicopter pilot did a wonderful job because the skid you see on one side was cut away, but he called for some bricks to be put in place, and he landed it without it rolling over. But John has got his leg hanging on the end of his artery or something. But the camera helicopter pilot, believe it or not, was a suicide pilot, a kamikaze, whose name hadn't come to the top of the list before the war ended. You couldn't have wished to meet a nicer man. We were great friends, but he did a wonderful job. But John then had to go and have his leg amputated. And I next met John at Duxford when he was filming the Battle of Britain, hung underneath a helicopter, about 2 years later. We met then, and he then went out to America to do a film called Catch-22. And apparently he couldn't get quite the shot he wanted out of the side of a Mitchell bomber with a cutaway side. He undid his monkey strap, his safety strap, to lean a bit further out to get the shot. And apparently he fell in the Pacific, about 5,000 feet. But knowing John, he'd say, well, was it a good shot I got before I fell out? And if you say, oh, it was good, he'd say, well, it was worth it. Totally debated, but a really nice chap. Sad that he went that way.